An invitation to trade in a notepad for an air pack and boots.
Let people feel, experience kind of the challenges of our job.
Politicians and journalists
I'm sweaty already.
get down on their hands and knees
I am getting too old for this.
for an introduction to firefighting.
Understanding what they go through and how important it is.
This week on Open Record, come along for Fire Ops 101. From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson. We are investigative reporters breaking down the big stories, what it took to get them, taking you behind the scenes. It's the stuff we couldn't tell you on TV. I'm Brian Polson, and I'm joined again this week by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hey, Sarah.
Hello.
You know, last time I called you senior executive producer. This time you lost the senior, apparently. I don't know. We're also joined this week by someone who is making her Open Record debut. It is Fox 6's Madalyn O'Neill. Hey,
Thanks
Maddie.
for having me. Hi.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, June 28th for release on Thursday, July 7th. And as we record, Maddie, you are preparing to air a couple of stories about firefighting in Wisconsin. And by the time the podcast is published, both these stories will already be available for viewing at fox6now.com, the Fox 6 Milwaukee YouTube channel. But these stories started with an invitation. Tell me a little bit about how this came about and why you decided to accept the invitation.
Right. Well, Sarah was nice enough to invite me and my photojournalist, Colin, to go on this day of training, right? So basically, people who aren't firefighters doing a whole lot of things that they're not used to, especially me. I'm not used to going into, simulated burning buildings and pulling dummies out and stuff like that. So it was an invitation, really. The fire union in the state will invite politicians, leaders from around the state, and journalists, too, to do this. Usually they do it every 3 to 4 years, but the pandemic threw a wrench in this. So this was really the first one in a while. So we got to go, and usually when we're doing stories, we're kind of, behind the scenes, right? Not participating. So this was a really interesting thing to actually be going into this, doing a story, but also doing this firefighter training at the same time.
So why, you talked about how, you're the ones covering it, or maybe the politicians are the ones talking about the importance of fire alarms or smoke detectors. So why kind of do you think that some of this was targeted more toward those elected officials and the media?
Well, I think what it is firefighters, they will go to politicians, or fire departments will, leaders, mayors, whether the, local level, state level, to try to get these resources. But I think that, from their point of view, they want to bring in politicians so they can learn why the fire departments are asking for these resources, right? So, we've heard for years and years that fire departments are short-staffed. So I think they just want to bring politicians in and be like, hey, we don't want money, just for fun. We want it to keep, trying to do our jobs and save lives.
So this is the invitation specifically geared toward elected officials and the media, because those are the ones who are either covering some of these issues of resources and other things, or the ones who are making those decisions. They want to give you that sort of immersion in a little bit of a sort of a taste of a day in the life of a firefighter.
Exactly, because, it's one thing to think about things in a way, but it's another thing to experience them and kind of had that other layer of understanding.
Well, and I think we've done we've done some stories where we get to go to the training and cover it, but not actually be in it. I mean, we had to give, the group that was putting this on, we had to give them Maddie and Colin's shoe size, t-shirt size. I mean, all the different measurements, so that this wasn't just them standing there with a camera and ready to interview someone. I mean, you saw in the video, it's, they had the masks on, the helmets, the jackets, the boots, everything. So it certainly was a different type of experience.
I didn't know what I was getting myself into, when you signed me up, and then I got this email like, hey, we need your shoe size and your shirt size, etc. I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to be more than I expected.
Yeah.
In a good way, though. Yeah.
Right.
So do you have any connections to the fire service? Do you have family members who are firefighters?
That's a great question.
Have you been through any of this? No,
not at all. But I've done so many stories with fire departments over the years, and it's just something to kind of gravitate towards. So this was really a cool opportunity.
Okay, so you'd never been through any of this before. You've seen firefighters in action, obviously, in stories. You've seen training, probably. What was it like? What did you guys do? Take us through Fire Ops 101. What did you do? How did it go? And maybe what surprised you?
So we got there much earlier than I'm even used to waking up, working the night shift. So we get there, and, there's a little opening, and then we really got right to it. Just, they took our vitals, made sure everything was good there, got us dressed in this gear, which, you hear it's heavy, but you put it on, and you're like, this is another Maddie on top of me, right now, because it's just so much weight. And then it was, really right into it. They would, give you a little bit of briefing at each station, I guess, and there were 4 different scenarios. And
What were those 4 stations?
yeah, okay. So the first one we did was like a search and rescue, and I think that was the most physically difficult because they simulated this like burning building. Obviously, without flames, they couldn't really do that safely. But you'd go in with your team, and you'd have to try in the total darkness, right? Wearing this oxygen mask and oxygen tank, which is also really heavy and something I just didn't think about.
Is that like strapped to your back?
Yeah, it's strapped to your
Okay.
back, and then and the goggles too, and the air mask you're wearing. It's like it really cuts off your vision too. So it's just this extreme claustrophobia, and it's like
But
getting used to these
you're
senses.
you're down on the ground.
Yeah,
with
eventually.
this
Yeah,
tank
after you
your
get this
back.
on you. And then
Okay,
you're like
all right.
crawling, and you're like, I was behind a state rep, and I'm glad she was in front of me so I could just kind of follow her. But I'm like carrying this pickaxe as I'm like crawling on the ground, and we're just trying to locate, a body, which was, of course, a dummy. And they teach you how to keep your hand on the wall to kind of know where you're going. You have to kind of like go all around the building and do this check. And
Feeling your way.
yeah, really just
keep your
feeling your way
bearings.
You
through.
couldn't see where you were
You
going?
could see like a little bit, but not a ton. And they would have these like, I don't know what it's called, but like technology where you can like infrared, so you could see through this device, but you didn't always have the device. And bless Colin's heart too, because he's following us with the camera. He's not wearing all the gear, but he's like trying to get all of this as well. And you're in there for just honestly, it's probably a few minutes, but it felt so long because I'm like, I can hear myself breathing, and I don't feel like I'm getting enough oxygen. And it's just something you're not used to. So that was the first one. I'm trying to think of and it was different orders for everyone, right? Because we were broken up in different groups. But then another one was like a simulated EMS, emergency medical services response, where they had this really realistic dummy that I didn't know even existed that could have, you could get its heart rate and try to, its heart would stop beating, and you'd have to like do things to make it, bring it back to life essentially. And everything was moving really fast. So like, not only was it like, the first search and rescue physically demanding, but with the EMS especially, it was like mentally and almost emotionally draining because they make it as real as they can. So they're trying to like put you in that mindset. And then, so that was 2 of them. Another one, this was a hard one too, was they'd want us to get the fire hose and get it up a few stories. And man, fire hose, everything's
That's
heavy,
demanding.
I guess. That's my main, I guess, lesson out of this. Everything is so heavy. So we only had, I think it was 3 of us to get this hose up the stairs and get it to, where you need to extinguish the flames. And I got to do that. And that was cool. But usually they say they would want at least 4 people for that. I was hearing from, I believe it was Sheboygan Fire Department. They say they're so short staffed, they usually only have like 2 people on staff who can pull that hose up. So I was thinking like, we have 3 of us, and it was really difficult. So that was one of them. And another one was car extrications, which here in Milwaukee, I'm sure you've talked about this a lot, reckless driving. I mean, the fire department, such a big issue with firefighters. Part of their job is to go and get people out of these cars. And it's so difficult because cars can be just so damaged, and it's always different. And you can train people how to like pry open doors and, do everything to, get the battery out so you're not at risk with that, et cetera. But each one is just like a different kind of puzzle, I guess. You have to go and figure out
Depending
how
on the way the car has been
how the car
crushed
is
or
being
smashed.
crushed.
Or,
exactly. And then, of course, there's people in there who are understandably probably freaking out because they're in this terrible car crash, and you have to try to calm them down. But one of the most interesting things was firefighters talking about how they can't even recreate how damaged cars get during car accidents. Like they would drop this huge cylinder from like 6 stories onto a car, and it wouldn't even come close to getting as damaged as you do in a crash. So that was really eye-opening.
So they can't go 119 miles an hour, smash into a tree, and then,
Right.
which is a real thing. I mean, it sounds absurd, but that's actually
right.
happening all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Trees are deadly. They were talking about that, especially like you run into a tree, it just destroys a car. And yeah.
So aside from everything's heavy, and and then just some of the kind of like you said, the eye-opening things, like we were doing this with 4 people in this other department, since we did it with 2. Was there anything else when you walked out of there and you were, I know that in the stories you do a little bit of reflecting, and had some time to think about it. I say what surprised you, but like what did you kind of walk away going, oh wow, it's just kind of a different appreciation or different knowledge of
That's
something?
a really great question. I think, like we talked about, I think just kind of like the emotional weight that a lot of these things carry, and talking to a lot of these firefighters and emergency responders who, a lot of them volunteered. They took time out of their day, out of their work schedule to come and do this and put it on. And, these people aren't in this business for the money. They're in it because they're passionate about it. And I think almost everyone I talked to, that just really kind of rang through about how much they really care about this job. And, like I said, it's not something you're getting into to be like rich and famous. It's like they want to save lives.
Well, and I think too is that something else that I'm kind of learning about more is that, there are firefighters that work full time as firefighters.
Yeah.
There are a lot of firefighters who are volunteer firefighters
Yeah.
who also have a full time job.
Yeah.
In some of these departments that aren't fully staffed all the time.
Right.
So that's another thing where, you and I had kind of talked about some of the stories maybe that could be, going out there, like things to think about.
Right.
But you came back and talked about short staffing, which
Yeah.
I think a lot of the departments are seeing across the board.
And
so
yeah.
So then, like, what kind of stories, what did we, you landed on 2. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there were probably more, that we could have done, but like, talk through that process.
Yeah, because like you said, we went into this without a definite story in mind, but just kind of ideas, like you said. And I think the staffing was on my mind just because it's something we've been covering for years, right? But also, I think what I came away with was the mental health aspect as well. I think those were the 2 that kind of seemed the most clear after doing this. But you're talking about these volunteer firefighters, and that's something, for years and years, that was kind of the way fire departments worked. A lot of them, especially in rural areas, relied on volunteer firefighters. And now that model is just has to shift with, there's just less and less people that are able to volunteer who have full-time jobs. They can't also, be a firefighter. And it's just an interesting look at how the dynamic is changing and how firefighters across the state are trying to grapple with that and talk to politicians and figure out, hey, how do we shift from this volunteer model where we aren't paying people to, keeping up the staffing, but that's going to obviously take more money to pay these people.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you end up in those rural communities with response times being an issue
Yeah.
because there are people who are working as volunteers and have to drive all the way into the station and then gear up and then head out. And if you've got someone who's there staffed full time, obviously responses are quicker. But there's always that budget balance. What community can afford a full-time fire department if it only has so many of these kinds of calls at any given time. What I found interesting about this is you said it was the firefighters union that puts this on. Obviously, they want to have that sort of impact. They want to get the message out to the decision makers and the people who cover those decision makers of what it's like and why it's important. I actually stepped back and I almost imagined like, do other departments think that, like, does DPW have like one of these, like, come be a sanitation worker? I mean, I think it would be because I think there's a lot that probably goes into that we have no idea what it's like, to be out there in the middle of traffic doing this, that, or the other thing, or filling potholes. Yeah. But so in some ways, this is a great marketing tool for the fire department. Did you get any sense? You said they do this every few years, except the pandemic maybe got in the way of that. Does it have an impact? Did you talk to anyone? I mean, do they seem to think that this works? I mean, does this help them come budget time when they go, hey, remember, Mayor so-and-so, when we, spent a weekend putting you through that exercise, now we need some more resources. Does it pay off?
I'm not sure in the past, but I mean, this part of my story was, they were lobbying for, this shared revenue bill, which would give more money to municipalities across the state to fund fire departments, not just fire departments, but that would be one part of it. So that actually, passed between the time we did this fire ops training and the time the story is going to air. But obviously there's still other things they want. But I think, talking to these politicians, they say that this is something they're going to keep in mind. So I think that's something we just kind of have to keep track of and see if
If
they
nothing
do.
else, I imagine it builds relationships. When it comes time to say, hey, you want to cut us back to 3 on a truck instead of 4, remember how hard it was to haul that hose. We need those people.
Right.
I suppose that relationship probably helps.
Yeah, because it's one thing to hear we need more firefighters, and it's another to think back in your head and be like, oh yeah, like I have this physical memory of like trying to do these things without enough people.
And then so that part of it is the short staffing and dealing with some of those challenges. The second story, as you mentioned, is about mental health. And so I think, can you just kind of talk through what you found out as far as the mental health goes, and then kind of just some of the latest legislation that's gone through that has helped firefighters deal with some of those issues?
Yeah, so talking with the president of the Professional Firefighters Wisconsin, the state union, he talked about how firefighters actually die by suicide more than they do on the job. And we think of firefighting as dangerous because rightfully so. It is a dangerous job, but learning more or dying from their own hands, I think kind of puts it in perspective. And it is a hard job. I mean, you're seeing things that no one else sees, right? I mean, like during this fire ops training, we couldn't actually see what they see because that just, wouldn't be safe. But, seeing people in car crashes and responding to all these emergencies and fires, I mean, it's traumatic. And they talked about how it's not just like one call always, but it's this cumulative effect of call after call after call just piles on, and it gets tough. And they just talked about the importance of having resources and actually talking about mental health, because I think in so many fields and in so many aspects of life, people just didn't really speak about mental health or seek out resources until more recently. And I think in the fire industry too, the tide is turning. We talked with PFFW about how they have a peer support group that's more active than ever, trying to help firefighters and emergency responders with kind of that heavy weight they carry.
I got to imagine in that field in particular, there may be, and maybe some of this is old school, maybe it's changing, but there's that sense of you've got to be tough. None of this affects me. You go and you see the worst of humanity or people at their very worst moments, and you're supposed to brush that aside because you're a tough firefighter. Does that play into like maybe you don't feel like you can go to anyone with how you're feeling or how you're struggling because you're supposed to be a tough guy?
I think for a while it did, and it probably still does for some people. But, I did get that sense from talking with people that it was, well, you knew what you're getting yourself into. You just kind of got to buckle up and deal with this. But I think as mental health conversations become less taboo, that's, kind of changing things too within the industry.
I know we often think of firefighters and think that they're going in and fighting fires, but so much of what they do is responding to car accidents. And in these more recent days, I think of Milwaukee Fire Department and a lot of others, they're responding to overdoses constantly. So you're seeing people, again, also in their worst moments, but those are often, situations where if you get there in time, maybe Narcan can save the day, but a lot of times simply too late. So they do definitely see some really dark things, and then you have to leave there and go home and go on with your life like everybody else.
Yeah, talking with the paramedic, he said something like, we're still human, we get feelings, and that's a great point you bring up too, is a lot of times they're meeting people on their worst days. But I've heard from a lot of firefighters too, that's something they like about their job is because they can help someone on their worst day.
What about, and then I don't want to misspeak, and so you'll have to correct me if I'm not right.
I'll try.
There was something signed, and was it for workman's comp or with the mental health stuff?
So that was a bill in Wisconsin recently, and I forget the year, but it was basically just to make mental health resources more accessible to firefighters. And the PFFW, Professional Firefighters of Wisconsin, now say that they're working toward making that bill expand to all emergency responders as well, not just firefighters. So
EMS workers, paramedics, things
exactly.
like that. So this is you think of firefighters getting hurt and needing workers' compensation. You think of a physical injury,
right?
But this deals with some of that mental health stuff as well, the PTSD and things like that.
And what was difficult before this bill was that firefighters would have to prove that they experienced something above and beyond what a normal firefighter would experience on the job. But you got to think like a normal firefighter experience is just very traumatic things.
Right.
So
how do you make your challenge bigger or worse or look different? So okay.
Right, so you had your experience in boot camp here, Fire Ops 101. Are you leaving us to become a firefighter?
I was sore for like 2 weeks after. I thought I was in okay shape, but man, I don't know. I think I'm going to stick with reporting for now, but who knows?
I'm still going back to that thing you said about how it's like putting on another Maddie. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of gear.
I think one of her sound bites was like, "I'm used to holding the weight of a microphone and not this."
It's a lot heavier.
40
and
pounds,
it's funny. Sometimes when I'm doing interviews, holding a microphone out, my arm will hurt after that. So this, like having a pickaxe, that was another level.
Don't tell them; they won't feel bad.
No, I know, absolutely not.
All right, well, that's a good time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question for which we have not prepared, but we have Sarah Smith here to ask us a question for which she's prepared. All right, what do you have this time?
Okay, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Let's go like this. What is an underrated human experience? So here are the things I wrote down. Crawling into clean sheets.
That's literally what I was just thinking.
So good. So good.
Crawling into clean sheets after you've showered, because
even better.
There's that almost guilt feeling that you're soiling sheets that you haven't.
And after a day of firefighter training, when you finally showered again.
So good. The other one I wrote down was the first knife into a jar of peanut butter. Like cutting through, or like margarine or something.
Or spoon.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
If you're
you
just
don't
gonna
get
like
just
grate
do
it,
it,
yeah.
yeah.
have you ever used a spoon as like the back of a spoon to spread?
No.
If your knives are dirty. How?
Yeah,
No.
you gotta get creative
That's
with
what
utensils.
Do your dishes. Get some knives. No,
Ew.
I have not.
Okay. So other ones, things that you really enjoy that
I
are
gotta think about
Things
this.
that are sort of like just that. I mean, for me,
Like-
I'll tell you what it is. It's the first sip of warm coffee on my front porch on a morning where I don't have anywhere to be.
Yeah.
At least not right away. I sit back, I sip that coffee on it, and that is
like I don't know. And
magic.
if the weather is a little crisp, like the air's a
Yeah,
little crisp,
yeah,
and that
yeah.
coffee almost like coats the inside of your
Yes.
stomach,
And you
it's
get the
so-
smell of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I think what I thought about almost right away was like just walking into a bookshop and like smelling all the books and knowing I can spend
Yes.
as much time here as I want and I can
Yes.
get all the books I want.
Yep.
Now, do you mean like little like independent
Yes,
bookshop?
I love whenever I
Not
go to a
like
new
Barnes and
city.
Noble?
I like Barnes and Noble too. Don't
Okay,
get me wrong,
all
but
right.
I like to go to like the little bookshops whenever I'm in a different city just to explore. And
That's
see
awesome.
different-
And
I
they're
almost
always so cute.
Oh, I know.
Like,
and the people that work there are almost always great, and I get great book recommendations. And yeah, that's probably one of mine.
Kale, I think I have one in mind that I think you might like, but I want to hear what you have to say. What's on your mind? What's your
Well,
what's
my
your
first initial
underrated-
thought was when you wake up and you think you have to go to work, but then it's still the weekend.
A good one.
It is, it
actually.
is.
I will tell you, when I was growing up, I had Peanuts sheets, and there was the little like the thought bubble or whatever,
Oh, yeah.
Charlie Brown, and it said happiness is ... and happiness is waking up and realizing you still have 2 hours to sleep.
So good.
I just realized the best one. Peeling off all of the protective coatings from new pieces of technology.
You're right.
Why is that so
That
satisfying?
film, oh, so good.
It
Is it? Do you ever have anxiety about pulling that film off? Like it's not quite ready. I need to put it
right,
there
yeah.
to protect
What do you
it.
mean ready? It's ready when
No,
you get it.
what I mean is like
No.
that
It does
sense.
feel like though. It's like, should it still be here?
As soon as you take it off, though, that's it.
Yeah.
You've
Doesn't go
spoiled
back.
it for all time because there's dust and there could be scratches. Like until you remove that, it's perfect. And I always fear the moment I remove it, what if I drop it now or something happens?
When we got our new phones here at the station, I was going around and peeling
Did
off
you get to do all of them?
everyone's- Well, that I wasn't
didn't mind,
asked
that's
to.
not fair.
I wasn't asked to.
You just took
Brian,
charge.
hand that to me.
Yeah,
Let me peel that
I'll
out
take
for
that.
you.
I'll take that.
The other one that I thought you might say, and I don't, because I know you love camping, is for me the moment that the tent is set up, and that first time you kind of like just step inside and lay down on whatever mattress you have there, and you just know you're camping, and the weekend is beginning or whatever it might be. To me, that's a phenomenal moment. I love that moment.
I want to
don't
be
count.
in that moment right now.
Yeah, I would. I'm sure many people listening to this will have just gotten back from that moment because this will be right after the 4th of July weekend, but long summer to go. Maddie, thank you so much for being here on the
thanks for having me.
podcast.
This was
And
fun.
we'll have to have you back anytime you've got a story that you want to share with us.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have you on. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on open record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to FOX6 Investigators at Fox.com. And as always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible, including our executive producer, Sarah Smith.
Senior
Our
executive.
senior executive producer,
Don't get it
Sarah
twisted,
Smith. That's
Brian.
right. Our editor, Dave Machuda, who has to deal with all of our mess ups, and chief photographer, manning the video switcher, Kale Zimney. With that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.